Hello, I'm Chris Moon, a fellow artist manager. I will be your guide through tough love, adventures, and artist management. In this episode, we share a spirited conversation with my friend Tom Osborn, the GM of Easy Eye Sound, a record label founded by Dan Auerbach of the Black Keys. We chat about Tom's history at several labels, including his time at Artist Direct, one of the first label services focused companies, on through stints at Anti, New West, and how he found his way to Easy Eye Sound, which ties together his philosophy and viewpoint on how artists can both carve out and create a lane for themselves. Here's my chat with Tom.
I'm Tom Osborn. I live in Franklin, Tennessee. I originally came from Denver, Colorado. There I moved to Chicago, Illinois, and School of the Art Institute of Chicago graduate. From there, I started working at the Metro in Chicago, the world famous nightclub, run and operated by Joe Shanahan, and moved to Los Angeles to get my master's degree in fine arts, which I did. But I met a girl who worked in the music business and had no desire to follow me up to Washington to teach shop. And I got a job working at Mammoth Records. And since that point, that is about 1995, from that point on, I've worked in the music business in a absolute myriad of different positions and configurations, but currently work for Easy Eye Sound, the record label owned by Dan Auerbach of the Black Keys. I'm currently the general manager.
Oh, man, that's awesome. That's a good, you even touched on stuff I didn't know about. I didn't know you worked at the Metro.
I
That's
worked
wild.
at the Metro. That was technically my first job in the music business. I was loosely working with a series of punk rock bands, mostly because I owned a van that I won from a scholarship fund. And one of the bands I took on tour was Fugazi's opener, a band called Trenchmouth. And Trenchmouth's biggest notoriety is Fred Armisen from Saturday Night Live fame was the drummer for that band. And so our first tour was a series of dates from Chicago back to DC with Fugazi, and then we went out with Jawbox, and then we played dates with MDC. It was hilarious. And then as soon as the day I got back, I got a call from Joe Shanahan saying, "Hey, we're looking for somebody to man phones at night slots and on the weekends." And I was like, "Do I get to go to shows for free?" And he's like, "Yeah, of course, I'm in." And I got recommended from Northwestern University's music director, who said I called every day and asking for tickets. And so that was kind of my journey. And from there, Joe Shanahan and I opened up a record store called Rave Records inside the nightclub. That was hilarious and weird. We did the last replacements in store ever. They broke up the following day.
Oh, wow. That's
Uh,
wild.
we did some fun stuff there, and then I became the building manager shortly after that, and from there I applied to grad school and moved to Southern California, and
Wow.
then worked at Rave Records in Los Angeles because I was addicted to hanging around with musicians and records. I should preface the whole thing. I have my master's in fine arts. I don't play an instrument. I don't sing. I don't write. I really came from fandom. I just love music. Everything I've been doing from that point on has been how do I pay it forward to the riches that I've received from music. So it's still kind of not lost on me. It's strange and awesome.
Yeah, and it's just one of the things I love about the music industry is, at least now, it seems now more than ever, it's like if you're going to be crazy enough to do this, you better love it.
Yeah,
you
it's
know.
it's it's definitely. I remember when I got my first job in the music business. It was definitely like it was really opulent, and there was a lot of like
Mhm.
positions to be held, and people didn't really work in the traditional sense. And for me, I was just like, wait, your job's to do what? That's not a job at all. And over those decades, it's really been whittled down to it feels closer to a calling.
Mhm.
The people I know who are in the music business, the idea of overnight success has just gone away, and at least in my world. And so the people who do it really have a deeper appreciation for music than I can recall in that period when I was first getting involved. The first company I worked for, I ran West Coast operations for Mammoth Records, and we were within Atlantic Records, and Atlantic was gigantic at that point.
Mhm.
And so I got to see that opulence in all of its magnificence and debauchery, and when this is not me at all. I, I don't want to do that stuff. So yeah.
So how'd you get out of that? Where did you go next?
From
Considering
Mammoth, I
Yeah.
worked at Mammoth and it was great, and it never felt like a job. I was still showing my artwork professionally. I had a gallery called Space Gallery that was showing my work,
Hmm.
but this was how I really paid the bills. And 5 years passed, and I realized, oh my God, this is my career. I missed a step here,
Right.
but I loved it. And when I left Mammoth, I got a call from legendary manager Pat Magnarella, who said that he and Bob Cavallo were starting a record label called Third Rail Records. And Pat, I had known from when he was an agent, and I answered phones at the Metro. He would
Hmm.
call and book his stuff. And over that period, he became a really powerful manager. And he had found out that I was hireable, and he hired me, and we started Third Rail Records together. And Third Rail at that time was a JV through Hollywood Records, and Bob Cavallo went and became the president thereof.
Oh, right.
And
Yeah.
yeah, so and it was a really interesting jump into the deep end. I was the only employee. I put out all the records. There wasn't a ton of support, but I treated it like going to finishing school,
Hmm.
and learned all aspects of the business that I could. And then, of course, I got a call from Mark Geiger, who I had also known from when he was an agent.
Yeah. The agent connection. Yeah.
Yeah, and I should also preface that Kimberly, my wife, when I first met her, she was Mark's assistant when he was at America as the head of A&R.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
so I got to spend a lot of time with Mark, and Mark and I were kicking around the idea of uh, artist masters owned record label.
Hmm.
That it was feasible. It was during that time. It was the great purge of artists from the business, where they were just trying to pare down and not carry 7 records, and cut the fat as much as they could. And Mark and I looked at it and went, "There's some real branding here. These artists are able to sell enough records to be financially viable, and all we need to do is use our infrastructure that we already have with Artist Direct to give them a home." And they
Hmm.
get to own their masters. And at that time, that was a completely revolutionary idea, especially if, there were artists who had owned their masters, but they had a ton of leverage. These were bands that had been dropped by major labels and didn't have the
Right.
infrastructure, and didn't have a next position to sign to a label. And I don't think they wanted to. They were able to record their own records. They didn't want to go have somebody else own their masters. So we had an option for them at that stage. And that this is like early 2000s. I can't think of anybody else who was doing it. Um, I would love to tell you that it was really exciting and vibrant, and everybody was banging on the doors. It wasn't like that, but Mark and I did feel like we were doing something really special and different. The big one was Michael Fronte signed
Hmm.
to us, and Michael sold a ton of records. He
Yeah. Still
treated he
does.
treat he treated it like he was the president of his own record label. He worked his ass off, and
Hmm.
it proved that it was a successful model. David Macias, who runs 30 Tigers, and I had a really great conversation as 30 Tigers started around that time as well. So uh,
Yeah.
it was, we were also a .com, the .com
That's
bubble.
right. Yeah.
Uh, we got punctured, and from there I went over to Vagrant Records and worked for them for a couple years, and then started to get into marketing, which is a position I really have kind of held since then. I went to work at Capitol Records, and then Warner Brothers Records in marketing for a number of years, and then Anti and Epitaph Records, and then Cobalt, and then New West Records, and to where I am now.
Yeah, it's interesting. I hadn't really thought about the whole artist direct thing and the fact that that was so early on, the artist
Yeah.
owned, kind of capacity. I mean, I spent some time in that too when I was at Network, which was in 2005,
Hmm.
through 2009, where we were on like the back end of like CD sales, where it was really viable as a smaller artist to take a bigger chunk of that revenue, but you guys were actually on the front end. But yeah, it took a while, and one would argue it probably took until the
It,
streaming era for people to
yeah.
kind of wrap their head around. not only the creative freedom component of it, but the business model component of it. And you're right, there is only a handful of options that could really um, service an artist in that regard. And that's still a challenge, I would argue, for any artist or manager trying to do it on their own. It's like, it's hard to find a partner who can really uh, help you market your music, without that labor,
1000%. Yeah.
relationship.
Well, I went
So,
back to it when I went to Cobalt, and,
mm,
Cobalt had a robust machine behind it, and it was the same quandary. Is a great deal of the expectation would fall on the management to carry the weight of being the record label.
mm,
They control they controlled the budget, they owned the master, everything was pre-agreed upon. Mark actually had a really interesting perspective because he's an agent by heart, and
mm,
so we would build contracts to be like doing a concert. And so there was a best case, worst case, and in the middle. And so if we met all of our numbers and we actually made money, we would go back to the artist and say, we have to renegotiate this deal to decide whether or not you want to use this money to
mhm,
fund back into the cycle of the record to keep it going, or if you want to cash out. And it became a really interesting endeavor. And so the more acumen that an artist possessed, and more kind of like on that side of the fold that they were on, the better it got. But a lot of artists, I had managers pull me to the side and say, I just can't do that because I can't be the bad guy. I can't
mm,
give that. And so one of the grandeurs of a traditional model is, I'm not participating in tour revenue. I'm not participating in merch revenue. I own the masters. And so it's my job to fulfill that element of it, and then I can help out with those other things because it obviously affects the record sales. And so I get to
mhm,
be in that position with, hey, I really want to do this, and this is why I want to do this, and it gives me a better position to not be as all encompassing or putting it all on the manager, and that balance. It's better than anybody. It's always a balance, and
mhm,
all those things that you're trying to do is motivate and keep focused and enthusiastic, and revenue fueling the system and all that. It's always a precarious dance, no matter how it's configured. It's always, you know, it's one of the more compelling parts about putting out records. Still, is that it's endlessly changing.
Yeah, and it's funny you'd mention about, Fronte being like in it and working really hard, but that's not like what artists were used to doing, say 15, 20 years ago. And I would argue that artists have kind of evolved a little bit and are definitely more business savvy and willing to kind of like do some of the hard work that
Mhm.
I mean, at the end of the day, it's all marketing. Like, all you're trying to do is find fans
It's
and then
all
figure out how to
marketing.
engage with them. I mean,
That's
that's what
exactly
it
it.
is,
Yeah.
especially now more than ever. I mean, there's metrics obviously involved, and money that flows around it, but unless you have some sort of emotional connection that you can nurture, it's like, what else do you really have? And that the heart of it, I think, if you look at any successful artist right now, and I'm thinking of younger artists, like a Billie Eilish in particular, obviously even Taylor Swift, kind of coming out of the back end of that, but knowing what she needs to do to engage with her audience and her
Yeah.
fans and what they want, and how to do that in an authentic way. It's like, it's funny. It's like, it's all like, all us in the industry have all become marketers and have more of a touch in the artist community component of it. And I think artists have become more marketers and managers in their own way, because that's a part
Absolutely.
of what needs to happen in order for it to all work nowadays. It's not as simple as, punching your ticket with signing a record deal, and then, just kind of doing some interviews, playing some shows, and hoping for the best. It doesn't, that's not the world we live in and we've
Oh,
evolved
it's
into now.
exceedingly competitive. It's
Hmm.
it's it's as competitive as it has ever been, and the bandwidth is, competitive. You've got all these incredible distractions for music, and how to make revenue is competitive, but it's really no different. It's just the levels have changed, and
Mm.
so I always say, the artist who wants it the most, works the hardest, gets it.
Yeah.
I've never had an artist who didn't, really hustle, get it.
Mm.
I've never had that. I know that's happened, and I know there's cases of it, but the artists that I've worked with that have had really great success have worked hard for it, and they whether that is putting in the hours, or they're just, relentless in their pursuits, or they are taking advantage of every offer that comes to them, whatever it is, they're fully engaged. It's the artists that are, disengaged, that I have the hardest time with, and has been a real struggle. When I was at Capitol Records, I used to keep a stack of DVDs and VHSs. It was that period where,
Of course, of course.
you had both. But it was, I'd have bands who would be like, "You wouldn't ask Radiohead to do that." And every time it would come up inevitably, because it was the House of Capitol and it was during the Radiohead heyday.
Right,
And
right,
I would hand them a cassette of Radiohead playing the MTV Beach House.
right. Which I remember seeing in real time. Yeah.
I was like, "Hey, if you don't think that they didn't work for it and didn't do those things that might be perceived as uncool or maybe a little unpleasant, you're sadly mistaken."
Mhm.
They took a path of, I think everybody forgets, Radiohead wrote a massive hit. That's
Right. Yeah.
that's where they were like, "Gauntlet's been thrown. We wrote the hit. Now we can do what we want to do." And they really carved it out, but they had a hit first. They were able
Right.
to lay out their base, and and to their acumen, they really nailed what they were going to be after that. They got the hit, and then they put everything in line. That's a great example. But they hustled, and they did things that were tough, and maybe a little exploitive. Like, but
Right.
they made it work for them, and they hustled for it. And so I deal with a lot of artists who see success in terms of YouTube or TikTok or whatever those scenarios are, where it's overnight and they're like, "I've won, here we go."
Mhm.
And I'm like, "Man, that's not how it works." And it's that window's not going to stay open forever. And until you treat it professionally, it's not going to be a profession. And
Right.
so I always, I ask the acts, I always start off when I sign a band, what do you want out of this?
Mm.
What do you want me? What's our goal? Where do you want to be with this? And I love that conversation, because if I get a candid answer, it's usually, "Hey man, you know what I really want to do? I just want to do this for the rest of my life. How do we do that?" And that's when every time it comes to me pitching an idea and I think it's going to work and they're resistant, going, "Here's a case sample that it did work, and maybe, we try it out. If it's uncomfortable and you don't like it, then maybe we back out. But, you know, you gotta treat part of it like a job." Because gone are the days
Mhm.
of the idea that, a record being good is good enough.
Right.
Everybody's record's great. Ask them; 'em,
Right.
they'll tell you, "My record's great." That's usually how every conversation, but it's not enough, and you
Mm.
have to treat it like a job, and you have to treat it professionally, and you have to work for it, and, that goes for, part of our conversation is managers.
Mhm.
Um, I see my responsibility is not to really engage with the artists like we're talking about right now, but instead it's really, what are the goals of the manager, and what tools do I need to provide to that person to achieve the goals that they have outside of just selling records, but touring and merch and all their infrastructure to carry forward. I'm keen to listen to that, because if they're doing their job great, they have a relationship of candor with their client that really gives me insight to what the two of us
Mhm.
need to put forward to make that happen. And so I love those conversations. I love working with managers. Some of my closest friends on the planet are all managers. You're thrown in there, Chris.
That's kind of you. No, it's
You're
it's
one of
an
my
interesting
favorites.
bunch. It's an interesting bunch, but yeah, I think in going into this conversation today, I was thinking about that quite a bit as far as that relationship, because I think not everyone that works on the label side or in the marketing side necessarily has such a strong affinity or connection with the artist. Quite often, it very much is kind of a little, their conduit is through a manager,
Mhm.
to a large degree, and that's their partner in crime and, trying to push things forward. But I always appreciate your approach because it does feel like you have a little stronger connection with the artist and what, like what they want to do, what they're capable of doing, what they're best at. I'm curious to
I
know, did you, what was your favorite answer to the question you said you posed earlier? Like, what do you want out of this? Like, what's a memorable one that comes to mind?
Well, I'd hate to give up the ghost to some people, some answers because I'm sure those artists would be embarrassed by those
Oh, you don't
answers
even have to
now.
say the artist so much.
But,
I'm just curious what the answer was.
I'll give a specific example. I'm currently working with an artist named Yola, who comes from Bristol, and she was absolutely incredible to work with from the moment I met her. Um, she had an understanding of who she was. At the time I'd met her, she had been singing backup for uh, everybody from the Chemical Brothers to Adele,
Oh, wow.
and she was in her mid 30s. She had put out an EP of her songs. She'd been in a band called Phantom Limb, and I think she was at that break point where she's like, "This is my shot. I'm gonna take my shot.
Mhm.
I'm gonna really press it." And I asked her, I was like, "Well, what do you want from me?" And she's like, "Look, I wanted to not think about working a day job anymore. I want to
Mm.
do this for the rest of my life, and I'm going to do whatever it takes." And my first real test was we launched the record and we brought her out to South by Southwest, and the response was great.
Yeah.
In fact, we did 15 events over a 7-day period, and I was burning her out, and I called her and I was like, "Hey, I'm burning you out. I really want to pull back. Maybe we should cancel some stuff." And she basically pushed me back and said, "Dude, I've been training for this for the entirety of my life. Back off."
Oh, that's awesome. I remember
And y
seeing her at, the Currents, party at South by that year, and
yeah,
yeah, she was phenomenal. I think I saw her a couple other times while I was down there, but
yeah,
yeah.
90% of my marketing plan is, you know, give people access to Yola. She'll
Yeah.
blow your socks off. And so we just kept on going, anything we can do to put her in a room with somebody is going to be a game changer. And then that's really been the marketing plan. I mean, specifically, if I'm talking about marketing and her, like she had given up her apartment. She had decided that she was going to live out of her suitcase. So she just wanted to work. Anytime we had work for her, she would go take it. And
Mm.
so she was just relentless in her pursuits. And her manager, Charlie, has one client, and it's really Yola. And so the two of them are tied at the hip, and they have just been absolutely incredible to deal with. I have not dealt with a tandem like that in my entire career. It's been very exciting to
Wow.
work with the two of them. They're great. I mean, as we speak, they're in Australia filming Yola's part in the new Elvis biopic.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
great.
So here we are. Yeah, she doesn't have to think about a day job ever again. I mean, her die has been cast to only be thrusted forward, and for me, that's the greatest riches I could ever want from this is the idea that this artist, whose true talent has found a home, gets to live in perpetuity. It's incredible. So
That is
I
amazing.
love that. But
Yeah.
it runs the gamut of
Mhm.
all sorts of stuff, whether it's bands who were like, I'll never forget Death Cab for Cutie, who I did not work with professionally, but I have worked with.
Mhm.
I remember Ben Gibbard calling and saying that he had recognized that no matter what happened from this point on, he would have a career as successful as Lou Barlow.
That was his
I was
bar.
like, that was his bar. He was just like, "That's what I wanted to do." So
Mhm.
everything from this point on is just icing, and it was spectacular to hear because he
Mhm.
recognized that, he recognized that he'd become a craftsman, a real
Right,
journeyman, and that
right.
he could tool this for the rest of his life. That he'd already put out a bass. The bass was going to go with him no matter what happened to the band, and that he'd be able to carry through. I thought that was a beautiful moment. I thought that was great, and they've obviously achieved incredible success.
Yeah, no, that's great. How did Lola come into the orbit of Dan and Easy Eye Sounds and all that? Because I mean, to me, when you see her, and if you have it, you can go out and do that.
Mhm.
I mean, she's just a star from the get go. I mean, it's just
She's
like this. She's
well,
a
the
career artist, those don't come around too often. Somebody
so
that has that kind of charisma and voice,
right.
and just like feels fully formed, and maybe doesn't have the confidence initially, but knows, to your point, what she wants and just needs the vehicle to get her there. It just feels like that was a perfect marriage of opportunity and timing.
Yeah, she was, like when Dan launched the record label, we were talking about what is the record label? Who are we as a record label?
Mm-hmm.
And Dan has an incredible sense of the artistry of making records. And he really looks at it the way, artisans do, craftsmen. For me, coming from the art world, that really had significant impact. He really enjoys the labor of writing a song, the labor of crafting the music, the marriage of it all coming together inside the studio. It's an all one house place. I mean, Dan will start off the process with bringing the artist in and writing from zero. And so they'll come and usually Dan will bring in a third party to write with him and the artist, and that runs the gamut from John Prine to Pat McLaughlin to Natalie Hemley. It's
Mm-hmm.
an incredible consortium of incredible songwriters. And part of the attributes of being in Nashville is
Right.
they all live here,
Yeah.
and they all love to write. And I'm always flummoxed by what we call the Bob Dylan problem, which is, you go into a room and you write a masterpiece, and then 6 months later you write another masterpiece,
Right. Right.
all by yourself. And I think that the rock world has kind of had to own that position.
Mm-hmm.
um, Country music is not. They don't care. They're going to write a song with whoever is going to write them a hit, and they've
Right.
done that for decades upon decades. And so Dan has really married those two worlds in a really beautiful way. So he'll usually spend 5 days writing with an artist, 2 a days, in the morning and then an afternoon. Right, we're doing it as we speak right now. And then at the end of the week, he'll have a fully rounded record, all written. And then the following week, he will start up the studio. And it's a legendary consortium of session cats from around the city, and it's absolutely incredible. And they'll bang out a whole record in less than a week. And so there's a real sense of the craft again, of all of it. So when we launched the label, it was very much about storytelling and craftsmanship, and the idea that a record could be done all in one position. And
Mm-hmm.
Yola had played at Americana, and it showed up on my radar, and showed up on a couple on Dan's radar, and we started talking about it, and we set up a meeting for her to come and meet with Dan and write. And
Okay.
so I talked to Yola about what is expected in the writing session, and she was completely down. And from that very moment, Dan and her hit it off. And Dan called and was like, "There's something special going on here." And Yola called and said, "I really love this." And within that afternoon, I think we had drawn up a contract to say, "Hey, we're interested in moving forward." And Yola was completely down. And shortly after, we finished up the record and recorded it. And that was um, a release that we put out. And then 4 Grammy nominations later, she's getting ready for record number 2 coming up shortly.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean,
Yeah,
it makes it almost sound easy, but yeah, it's a lot of work that goes into it, but also a little bit of just circumstance and
yeah.
being the right place, right time, and honing
Well,
that
I mean,
craft. But it's and it also stepping into a place where it's almost like Motown, like where you guys have developed the infrastructure on both sides creatively, but also, yes, we have the label, yes, we can put this out, and there's an association that happens there. And I would imagine as you continue to do more, there's an immediate built-in audience for that to some degree too. I remember you guys going out and doing the Easy Eye sound review, and that was just so refreshing and fun to see. And quite honestly, I mean, it was fun to see Dan play some of his songs. I mean, like, was it Robert Finley? Is that right? I mean, just seeing that kind of powerful thing was just invigorating. And
yeah,
it's like, and I guarantee you, nobody, hardly anybody in the room, I saw it here in St. Paul at the Palace, knew what they were in for, and we're just thrilled by the whole experience. It's like that kind of thing is endearing, I think, in these times to be able to, craft with so much intent, and purpose, that kind of opportunity across the board is
Well,
pretty exciting.
Dan's such an extraordinary cat in so many ways. One of my favorite things about Easy Eye is Dan's own personal narrative.
Mm,
Dan's father was a picker, a junker, and
mm,
so Dan would spend his weekends going to antique shows and flea markets and you know sorting through what everybody else would consider detritus and crap.
wow.
He learned the value of things very young, and his father would take him to picking parties and to blues bars, and so he really honed that sense of these things might have gone overlooked. And
Mm,
so while Dan could work on platinum level acts after platinum level act, he is probably more excited to find acts who people might have gotten lost in this shuffle.
yeah.
And he, if it's like usually when people are bidding on an act, it's a all the A&R cats are out and there's all this fervor around it. It's the biggest turnoff for Dan. He's just like, ugh. If they all like it, something's wrong. These people are broken. Let's move. And it's really exciting to work with that because I don't know what he's going to go with next. We've signed everything from, D. White, who was absolutely stunning vocalist, who was out of the backwoods of Alabama, a town so small you can't find it on the map. He was discovered delivering antiques to a mutual friend, and the guy caught him singing and said, "Dan should hear you sing." Brought him to Nashville, and Dan was like, "Yeah, we're signing you." And
Oh,
then
wow.
D got signed through a deal we did with Warner Nashville, and then turn around and Dan's working with legendary blues guys like Leo Bud Welch, who has been recording blues records for a number of years, but kind of never got his light, and then recorded with Dan and sadly passed shortly after. But
Mm,
or Jimmy Duck Holmes, who we just put out a record with and got a Grammy nomination for traditional blues album of the year. Someone who did not believe me when I called to tell him that he had been nominated for a Grammy. He's like, "You're you're wrong," and I was like, "What are you talking about? You got nominated." So he really can run the gamut. And so I never know what's going to be exciting for him. I will throw some stuff at him periodically that I think he might have on a register. And sometimes he's just like, I don't hear it and I don't see it. Or he'll be like, what's the narrative here? Or let's get this person into Nashville and see if they can write. If they can write, that's compelling for him. So it's always an ebb and flow of what is working for him and what he's excited about. And if you look at our roster, it explains the complexity of a very astute A&R mind who thinks on things on a different terms. I mean, the exciting thing about the Caravan that you saw was that was born of kind of branding and necessity. We have been putting our logo on all of our artwork, much
mm,
like the classic labels of the 50s and 60s
right.
would, because Dan wants it to be this seal of approval that, hey,
Mhm.
this really was thought about a lot and really given a special touch. And whether it's in a genre you're not familiar with or you're super familiar with, that ultimately you'll love all these records because the harmony of the craft is all there. And so when it came to signing Robert, Finley was the first signing on Easy, our first formal release outside of Dan's solo record.
Mm,
Robert was 65 years old and never really toured and didn't have a bass. And we talked about how do we promote this record back to marketing.
mhm.
And um, it was the reality is he didn't even have an agent. And so I said, if he really is, you want him to play in front of people, he should be opening up for people. And if he's opening up for anybody, you just put out
That
a
must be
record.
you.
It should be you. And so we had also put out Shannon and the Clams and Shannon
Mhm.
Shaw's solo record. And so we decided to go old school Caravan style. We actually brought all the session guys, many of them who had never toured before,
Oh,
you
wow.
know, in their late 70s on a tour bus. And so it was a rolling caravan. The Clams followed us in their van and opened up the set. And then Dan would play and bring out Shannon, and Shannon would do a couple songs. And Robert would do a couple songs. And then Dan would close the night and would bring on guests depending on the city. Beck came out in LA, and um, Bobby Bear came out when we were here in Nashville, and
Mm.
it was really beautiful and harmonious, and really kind of fit our own internal narrative. So I love doing stuff like that. I love being a history buff of music, and so when we're able to cycle back to things that, how does this not work anymore? Why isn't anybody doing this? This is baffling. To be able to unearth something like that that's so special, I love doing stuff like that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm sure with that eclectic component, even with the narrative and story kind of built in for Dan, I'm sure it still presents, a bit of a clean slate each time to some degree, I imagine, when it comes to marketing. It's like, how do you take this, even with this, like you were saying earlier, it's not enough to make a great record. Everybody makes a great record.
That's
You
right.
have to have that story to go along with it, but having that eclectic nature of such a wide breadth of different type of artists, I mean, I imagine that presents a bit of a challenge, in a good way, but still a challenge each time.
Oh, it's a wonderful challenge. I usually start off a campaign by what we call writing a marketing blurb.
Mm.
And the marketing blurb is a summation in a couple sentences of who this artist is. It's hard to do. It's not easy,
Yeah.
but it's really, really a great check for everybody in the system, and everybody kind of takes stabs at it. So everybody who works at Easy Eye sees it, reviews it, gives their notes, and by the time we're done, they're pretty good. I save them all. I love reading them because I love the idea of an elevator pitch. We don't You
Yeah.
don't get a lot of time. I was lucky enough when I was a young college student. I met Iva Watts Russell
Oh,
at
wow.
4AD. A
Yeah.
friend of mine worked at 4AD, and I clearly coveted everything 4AD put out, and he introduced me because I know that he's a big art fan, and he's like thought we like each other, and I just started working at Mammoth as well, and he gave me this great insight
Hmm.
about making sure that you're putting out art. And he's like, great art deserves to be talked about. And he's like, you should always put yourself in a position of talking about an artist 3 times before you send them any music. And so they were like, really
Hmm.
get a chance to tell who they are so you can really kind of set them apart from everybody else. Because look at my desk. And there was stacks and stacks upon unopened CDs. He's like, maybe a small percentage of these will ever get listened to. He's like, the ones that get listened to are the ones that get called out 3 times. I
Hmm.
love that. And
That is
so I love being able to go, why is this artist different? Why does this artist deserve your time to hear? Uh, when it's like everybody's trying to write bangers, everybody wants to write a hit, and that's always precarious. Ultimately, I would love to be the what is the story you're trying to tell? Who is this artist? And being able to use the deciphering of an album the way we listen to them as kids is very exciting still to me. I still love watching artists figure out who they are through their songs. It's always a really rapturous journey.
Yeah, no, it's definitely, and yeah, mentioning 4AD, I mean, part of that narrative for them was their um, cover art or just packaging, and the visual, I guess, component of it was a huge part of that narrative and draw
Oh
point
yeah.
into any of those artists that they ended up,
And think
champion.
about those bands. You could talk about those bands.
Hmm.
They all had a real interesting story and narrative, and, I always was compelled because you'd read about them endlessly and then be lucky enough to that your local store was carrying them. I'm clearly a kid of the '80s, so it's a big reveal, but, I love those, and that's always been kind of like that idea of packaging and storytelling and songwriting and who that artist is, and that carries through still. I'm always caught by those releases.
Yeah, and I think the really successful independent labels, at least nowadays, have kind of harkened back to that aspect. There's some element to it. Like if you were, yeah, in your whatever late '80s, early '90s, you're going to buy every 480 record, or at least be curious enough to check it out. And you're kind of creating a similar thing with Easy Eye Sounds. It's like I want to at least take a moment to
Right.
see what this is about, because it's worth my time and attention.
Well, think about when we were, in that era, if you bought a record, you were making a financial investment. You
Yeah,
may have been lucky enough to hear a song on your local college station, a song. It was never in heavy rotation, but it
right.
was usually that kind of like Criterion does that right now. I mean, they've done an incredible job of really branding the story of these great movies, and
Yeah.
I'm always sensitive to that. And so when people buy my records, buy the records we're putting out, I want them to feel like, hey, I know they're really gonna tool every song here. This isn't gonna be about one song on the record. It's gonna be about 12 songs on the record. And then
Mm.
I'll make that. And so if it's a physical purchase, I want it to be a rich one. And then even if it's streaming, I'm real adamant that I want as much full ingestion streaming as humanly possible. As one song is just a chapter from a bigger narrative, a bigger book. And
Yeah.
so I'm clear about wanting to direct that. The press pieces, the publicists who I hire, even the radio folks, even the radio formats. Like Americana is a really important format for me because there's an album format still,
Hmm.
and so they're focused on album formats. And programmers will pick songs out that I'm like, oh, I why didn't I think of that song? I'm always taken by that. So I like that there's that range of opportunity.
Yeah, yeah. And when you get further down into, I hate to use the word niche, but just specialized, I guess, aspects like that, there's an opportunity to kind of speak some personality into it that kind of goes both
Absolutely.
ways, which is, kind of a rarity in a sense. I think if you can, yeah, through all those mechanisms, if you can find enough, again, lack of a better word, kind of momentum to get somebody to kind of like spend some time with it through the narrative, through the visuals, and obviously through the music, then hopefully you get a moment to kind of like really capture something that's going to have some meaningful longevity
Mhm.
for the artist, and for all the things you guys are investing in, too.
Yeah. If
Uh,
we do it right, we make records that last a lifetime.
right, right. And
You know,
get the
don't be
opportunity to continue to make records too, which is a semi rare thing nowadays.
absolutely, absolutely. I mean, our goals are to work with the artists as long as humanly possible, as long as they're invested and they see a real vision for themselves and being at Easy Eye. That's the exciting part about being here now.
Yeah. Yeah, and it seems like your career almost went full circle in a sense, It's like you've always danced around the kind of, agent slash, artist friendly component, artist services aspect, to now, essentially running a label for an artist. I love when there's through lines
Yeah, me too.
that way.
I mean, I'm always convinced, Chris, that no, that, the rug's gonna be pulled out. There's no way. I mean, I can't begin to tell you a point of where I was like, "I'm confident I'll be doing this for the rest of my life." I've never felt that way. I still don't feel that way. I'm always ready for, "Okay, enough of these shenanigans, Osborne. You're out of here." Um,
Oh,
so I honestly try to put myself in a mind space of like, treat this one like the last release you put out. Make it special. Do right by this artist and deliver at the highest rate. Because again, I just am a fan and I want the music to live and be vibrant. And I love the idea of the legacy of being involved with these things. When I was at Epitaph Records, Dave Hansen, who was the GM at that time, was interviewing me and asked me, Why do I want to do this?" And it was one of those questions. I'd never had a boss ever ask me that.
hmm,
And it was a really kind of open-hearted moment for me where I just blurted out, "Hey man, I just want to be a part of something bigger than myself."
hmm,
And that is a really truthful answer. I love what I do because I always feel like this is bigger than me. That's special. That an artist is willing to share their art with me and let me be a shepherd for them and their larger flock. That's incredible. That's not lost on me. I love it. And I constantly am reaping the rewards of whether I'm working with, the likes of Tom Waits, or I'm working with, early James. They're the same to me. They both have aspirations and goals,
Mhm.
and they want to communicate, and they want to expose their art on their terms, and want to do it uh, for a long time. That's that's exciting. Still, it keeps me up at night and keeps me rolling through the days.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Oh, man. I can't thank you enough for chatting through all this.
I love it, man. I've listened to the podcast, and you've had some really people I admire and people I love, and
Oh.
I love the idea that you're willing to share this stage for people to talk about their enthusiasm for the things that we hold true and are enthusiastic about ourselves. So I am deeply honored to
Oh.
share this with you, my friend.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, I always love to kind of wrap this up with a series of quick questions. And it's
What was the hardest I ever laughed? Oh wait, that's a different podcast.
no, that would be
Sorry.
great though. Totally open to that. But it's been fun because you learn so much from somebody through just some shared experiences
Yeah.
in a lot of ways. So to kick that off, what was the first record you bought, like physically, that was meaningful to you?
Oh my God. Really? That's such a great question. Um, that would have to be Kiss's Dress to Kill.
Oh, awesome!
The
Wow.
first that was the first record that I bought. Um,
Hmm.
Kiss became like they were on the Paul Lynde's Halloween special, uh, and here was this theater,
Hmm.
these grown-ups dressed up as whatever they're dressed up at. And I just was like, this, I have to own this. And that record cover is just one of those like, oh yeah, see, they're grown-ups, they're wearing suits, they're businessmen, yet they have makeup on. And they're these characters. And for me, when I talk about storytelling, I'm like, I love that.
Hmm.
Um, and it didn't have the acumen at that age to recognize their predecessors, the New York Dolls,
Right.
and Alice Cooper and the like that led to it. But for me, that was something that, hey, I'm willing to put down my allowance to go out and get. And plus, I was a comic book kid, and
Oh,
so there's this kind of the living embodiment of comic books come to life. They play instruments and rock music and in big arenas. It was theater. I couldn't. What better do you want as a child? But there are Beatles records and other stuff, but that was the one I remember going
oh,
to the record store and buying myself.
yeah, that's great. Yeah, I wonder if there's overlap with this next question. What was the first concert you went to then? Was it
Oh,
an
no.
orchestra? Ah.
No, not at all. Okay, so this is a really interesting insight. So I'm a child of divorce, and my mother was dating a writer from the Boulder Daily Cameron named Mark Fromm. And Mark was a college student at Colorado University in Boulder and was the music journalist, music for their music program of the local paper. And
Okay.
so he was going to concerts and writing reviews and writing concert reviews and like, and my mom just didn't enjoy any of that. So what better? I'm going to take this child to concerts, and so he took me to just a unbelievably rich tapestry of concerts.
Oh, wow.
I met Steve Miller and when I was just a tot, and
Wow.
Niels Lofgren, and all these incredible characters. Eddie Money.
Wow.
It was completely randomized. But the first concert he took me to was I went and saw Felix Pappalardi and Creation.
Mm.
Now, nobody knows who Felix Pappalardi is, which is deeply sad. But Felix was a legendary studio cat. Worked with Eric Clapton and Cream, and obviously
Yeah.
was the bass player for Mountain. When Mountain dissolved, Felix moved to Japan, and in Japan, he decided that he was going to assemble this band of all Japanese musicians. So the
Wow.
rest of his band was these young Japanese men who played rock, and they would wear he would come out in a nudie suit, and they would all be wearing these rock outfits, and he played a little, like, it couldn't have been more than a 300 capacity room in Colorado, and I was just like, "This is incredible," and I got to meet Felix, and sadly, he was killed a number of years after, but
Mm,
that was my very first concert, which, I mean, can you imagine being a kid and being
yeah,
backstage at some of these concerts? And so I
no,
always say it's like, "Oh, clearly what happens to you in your childhood affects you in your adulthood."
right,
Let's be honest, clearly my only goal has been to be backstage.
right,
I'm
right.
just I'm just constantly trying to recreate it over again.
Oh, that's great.
And the cool part about it is with social media the way it is, I had a moment of absolute gratitude. And tracked down Mark Fromm.
Oh, wow, that's cool.
Yeah, and this is the badass part is he's a practicing, psychologist who does music therapy.
Oh, wow, that's
Isn't
awesome.
that bananas? Yeah,
Yeah,
so that was my first concert.
wow. I love
Yeah,
that. Kiss
yeah.
would have been great though, but yeah, still that's
Kiss
even
would have
better.
been great. I did see Kiss. For me, I was very young. It scared me. I was scared.
Oh, yeah.
I remember being I remember being scared because, they're space aliens and
Right.
demons. You're supposed to be fearful of them, but no,
Uh,
it was Felix, and it was on a lark. It was literally like he just wanted something distracting in the form of a small child at a concert, and
right.
I was that, so he dragged me along.
That's awesome. I had a similar experience. My, now brother-in-law, but, at the time was just a friend of the family's, lived across the street from us in Kentucky. I happened to play drums and he played drums, and I didn't have a very nice drum set, so he had like 3, so he brought one over for me to, like, practice on, which was really amazing. And we're of a similar era too, where uh, he was a little older. Well, I think, I forget how old Mark is. He's probably 12, 15 years older than me, maybe. But anyway, he was in his late 20s and I was like 15. So yeah, about 14, 15 years. And he'd like taped like just hours of like David Letterman and like Johnny Carson and like any music program that was ever on TV, he'd
Yeah,
taped like the late 70s
yeah.
through mid 80s. He had like all of Live Aid on tape, like well before you could, actually find that anywhere to see. So anyway, all of that opportunity to kind of soak all that music in was amazing. And then we started going to shows, and I grew up in Henderson, Kentucky, which is kind of in a nice little epicenter where it's like 2 hours to Indianapolis, 2 hours to Nashville, like 3 hours to St. Louis. So like, we could go and see and catch pretty much any artist coming through in one of those towns. So like, he took me to see like Springsteen and Bowie and just a whole array of artists I would have never
Bananas.
had an opportunity to see growing up where I did at the time in high school, in like late 80s, early 90s. And yeah, I'm eternally grateful for that, because it's funny, like I think the concert element of it, and obviously we're missing it now during the pandemic. It's just yeah, you can talk about the experience of listening to music. We can talk about the business of marketing music, and all that is wonderful, but man, like what an amazing gift it is to witness music being performed.
I was just saying this the other day is that I don't even know a period in my life that I spent this long away from live music.
Yeah.
I can't even. I mean, when I was a little kid, my mom would take me to the outdoor symphony, or we'd go to bluegrass festivals and stuff like. So I was always seeing it
Mhm.
live. It was so vibrant and so much a part of my life for as long as I can remember. And I had that weird epiphany how long I'd been out of it. Yola performed at the Ryman as a taped performance for Seth Meyers,
Mm.
and it was all done in a COVID-based room. There was nobody there, and I'm sitting there watching her perform, and I just broke into tears. I was just like, "Oh, this is it. This is what this feels like. I remember this." And for me, that was really super grounding to go, "Don't take this for granted because it can be taken away from you." And the idea that, the substitution is online eventing, and is I can't wait to see a live concert and be with people
Right.
experiencing that. I can't help but think about those memories of all the concerts that I've gone to. When my wife and I first started dating, we keep, you keep a calendar, a physical calendar. You didn't have
Mhm.
it in your phone, and I look back at these, and it was like one night after another of like we're going to the Troubadour, we're going to the Roxy, we're going to the Gaslight, we're Dragonfly. Every single night we were seeing bands
Mhm.
because it was just an insatiable, thirst. And now that it's been unplugged, it's just like I'm I can't believe it's been that long. I cannot wait for it to start up again either, but it's been painful for sure.
Yeah, it's been a long drought. What was the last show you saw before everything
Oh,
kinda got canceled?
um, so we're coming up on a year, and
Yeah.
so at this time last year, I was out in Los Angeles for the Grammys as Dan had been nominated and Yola had been nominated.
Mhm.
And then immediately from there, went to Austin, Texas, and saw Yola perform at Austin City Limits, the
Oh,
last
wow. Yeah.
last full taping they did. But the
Wow.
last concert I saw is we got hit by, the tornado on March 3rd,
Right.
and
Yeah.
it was devastating for, Yola,
Mhm.
who comes from, England, and the funny thing about England is England doesn't have natural catastrophes.
Disaster. Yeah, it's true. I had thought about
They
that.
they don't have tornadoes or hurricanes or, earthquakes. They just don't. So it's completely foreign that we have these in spades here. And she was here in Nashville and it scared the crap out of her and she saw the devastation and her immediate plug was, "We need to do something." And
Mm.
she was like, "We're gonna put on a concert." And so it started with a call to me and her manager and her agent, and then we were like, okay, we're going to do it at the Cannery. We'll do it at the High Watt. And it just grew so quickly. Within a day, we were at Marathon
Mm.
and selling tickets at Marathon that sold out in 5 minutes. And so the last concert I got to see was, you know, some of my all-time favorites all here in
Yeah.
Nashville. Yola, Brandy Carlisle, Natalie Hemley, Dan, the brothers Osborn, Ashley McBride, Kendall Marvel. It was like, hey man, if you're really gonna go out, let's go out big. But I
Yeah.
remember like people were coming up for hugs and handshakes, and I was like, I don't know how I feel about that, but I was supposed
Yeah.
to fly to Los Angeles that week to see John Anderson open up for Blake Shelton and held back because I was gonna do this benefit concert. But the benefit concert happened on the 11th, and then on the 13th, the world changed and shut down. And so I did leave on a very high note. We raised over a $500,000. We distributed to incredible organizations. It's paid off in so many ways. So if you're gonna go out, go
Yeah.
big. I was lucky enough to go really big and be a part of that, and so it was enough fire to really carry me through. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh,
good
that's
good
great.
last concert. How about you?
Oh, my last one. So I saw Nathaniel Rateliff at a Bernie Sanders rally here, right the night before Super Tuesday. And then I saw him a couple nights
Incredible.
later, with his proper show here because he was kicking off a tour here. So yeah, and then much like everyone else, I had grand plans to be in Austin for South by and soak in a ton of things, and all that evaporated as it needed to at the moment. But yeah, I
Right.
remember that benefit, and I remember watching it online. But I guess and I knew the tornadoes were close to that, but I guess I didn't put two and two together just how close it was to the shutdown. So
It was just couldn't have been more bizarre. We hosted an event at the offices, the studios on the 3rd and came home and we'd, being from Los Angeles or had lived in Los Angeles for as long as me and my wife had, um, we marveled at the idea that you could project catastrophe. So we knew tornadoes were coming, so we just stayed up. And so we watched it in real time in horror because it hit the Q Prime offices,
oh yeah, I
and
guess that's right there in
and
front.
so we were calling frantically people going, "Hey, are you okay? Is everything?" And so it really did a number. That I've seen a lot. I had not seen anything like that. It was really incredible, and Nashville responded beautifully. I
Mm.
mean, again, we put on this concert with no notice, and the sponsors just poured out of the woodwork. Local artists who couldn't contribute donated. It really was a spirited event. And then literally we're like, oh, there's a global pandemic too. Perfect. This is great.
Oh,
How
man.
lovely.
Yeah.
But, I am watching what's happening with consumption of music, and, music consumption is at an all-time high.
Yeah.
It's clear as a bell that, music is comfort food, and so during these situations, I can't help but think that, we're cooking for the masses too. And
Yeah.
I tell my artists who are like, "Look, I don't wanna put out records right now, it doesn't feel right, I can't tour it, I can't support it." I'm like, "We'll make more records.
Right.
You need to feed people too. That's part of your responsibility of being an artist. You need to give back, and they need you as much as you, as more now than ever. And so I'm really thrilled when we're able to share records with an audience find solace in it. The cool part about where we live now is we get to see it in real time. I love reading YouTube comments, and I
Yeah.
love reading, the stuff that, hey, this really changed, made my day, or put a smile on my face. Little stuff like that that's super impactful. Music is really a potent drug, and hopefully, it's something that gets people through the days. And we'll look back. We're living in history, and we'll look back
Mhm.
at this and go, these are the records I remember from that period. And I marvel at that. I love that.
No, I think you're right, and I think we'll come out of this with an incredible thirst to have that experience again of live music, and,
Oh, can you imagine what it's going to be like? I just can't fathom how voracious the appetite of people are going to be.
Mhm.
Although I say that, and I'm going to be like, can you stand back a little bit? You're pushing in my space a little bit. I'm six
Right. I
feet.
mean, what it'll look like, yeah, will be a challenge, but I think
But
just
just to see live music and hear live music
yeah,
and
and
be in
see
the
so many
presence of
people
it.
crying is gonna be amazing.
Oh, yeah. Without a doubt, just bawl. Yeah, if you're a real crooner and you can really put the emotion in the songs, there's gonna be some
It's not gonna
bawling
take
going
much.
on.
Yeah. Oh
Yeah.
gosh, that's hilarious. Well, just a couple more questions and we'll wrap up.
Sure. I love it.
What have you stumbled upon lately, musically that you're really loving?
Oh, snap.
Always a tough question, but it doesn't have
That's
to
such
be
a
like
tough
new.
question.
It could be, just what you've listened to recently that's kinda moved you that you really
Okay, well, I can tell you that I listened to a record last night and I bawled my eyes out, but, it's a record that I can't talk about yet because it's one of ours,
Oh,
but
okay.
it hit me like a hammer. I Dan
Wow.
is super protective about records, and he doesn't he treats it like a painter would. He's like, "I don't want you to see the painting as I'm painting it. Let
Right.
me finish the painting." And so he's got a great methodology, and it works. And so he sent me the record last night. I was just like, "This is absolutely breathtaking."
Wow.
Um, to be honest, right now, I am all across the board musically. I am streaming music at an unparalleled rate, much to the confusion of everyone in my house, because it will be everybody from uh, Femi Kuti to the new Aaron Fraser record, which I've been playing a lot of. Um, that's such a tough question. I don't know. Um,
No, it's okay. Those are great.
I
It
love the
is.
Taylor Swift record. I think
It's
it's
great. I mean, putting
I
both those records out this past year, I think's been a solace for a lot of people.
yeah, I love an artist who, you know, changes the vernacular of what we consume as a pop record overnight. It's
Mhm.
just like, she's we were talking about it being, is this an alternative record? And I'm like, can you be an alternative record if you have the number one record in the world twice in 1 year?
Right.
It feels like a total shift. Oh boy, there's some really guilty pleasures. I feel really weird about this. Okay, I'm gonna do it. I really love the Haim record. I think that
Oh,
record
yeah,
is
it's fantastic.
really a lot of records that I would probably not be into have really kind of been spirited, and I really appreciate it. I like that Haim record. Um, it's such, easy fruit to pick of
Mhm.
saying Fiona Apple's record,
Yeah,
Fetch the Bolt Cutters is, a marvel. The Haley Williams record is really
yeah,
great. It's just
really
really
good.
clever and smart. I think there's some really intelligent records coming out from artists who are pursuing it in a fearless fashion. The new I don't know if you've heard the new Iggy Pop record,
Mm-mm, I
but it's
need to listen to.
oh my god, it's insane. It's insane. It's great. Uh, there's a great Jeff Bridges spoken word record that is just as bizarre as records get. I'll just go on and on and on. I mean,
Great.
I consume a lot of records, and I am lucky enough that I share a household with a 17-year-old daughter who consumes music at an unparalleled rate, and she shares it. So we have a shared family playlist,
Hmm.
and so she's constantly turning me on to stuff. Then our newest signing was built on a signing that she had in her algorithm, and it kept on showing up, and I kept on going, Sadie, what is this? She's like, Dad, we keep on having the same conversation over and over again. You need to. And so she was right. I called the band and just was like, who are you guys? And I signed them.
That's
We signed them.
awesome. Oh.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So yes, I that's a tough. What are you listening to, Chris? You've always got really interesting taste.
Oh, I can't. Yeah. Even though
See,
I
it's
posed the question, it's just
easy
as
for you
hard.
to ask. What a
Yeah,
jerk.
I get to
No,
ask
you. I
questions.
will say for the audience that is still listening, um, Chris is fun to follow because he really listens to beautifully introspective records that require a lot of focused attention. I like the records. I like the records that the artists you work with. I like the records you always turn me on to.
Hmm.
Um, I don't think you remember, but you turned me on to the Milk Carton Kids,
Oh,
and
really? Okay.
yeah, at South by Southwest,
Oh,
actually.
okay. Wow.
You had mentioned them in passing and was like, "I think you'd really like this." And then shortly after, I started working with them, and that was a band that I was like, "This is really intense and very clever and very smart."
Hmm.
And you were. I always think about that moment. It was like, "Oh, Chris turned me onto that. That's a good one."
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. Oh, there's so much great music out there. So much. It is a really hard question to answer.
Yeah, I love the fact that, we have it all at our fingertips. You can
Yeah.
listen to music anywhere at any time. You can take it mobily. You sit on, my phone carries a library of billions of songs. That's
Right.
incredible. So whatever, I constantly am taking notes of like, oh, you should listen to that. That'd be interesting. And so yeah, consume, consume. And the best part is if you don't like it, you don't have to hear it anymore. You can even thumbs down it going, I don't want to hear that anymore. That's a real bummer.
Oh, it's true. So true. Well, outside of music, what really brings you joy at the moment?
Movies,
Yeah. That's a
by far
common
and
answer
away.
to this question, it seems like.
I
I
think it's
love.
I think it's a COVID answer.
Yeah, that's
Um,
true too.
movies and books. I have not read as much as I would like, for a long time, and then COVID got me back into reading again, and I forgot how much I enjoyed it. I'm like, "Oh, this is great. This is really enjoyable," and carving out time and to go read, I really like that, but really, honestly, movies. Again, I share a house with, my wife and 2 teenagers, and so not having anybody inside the house, we've treated it like a giant frat house. It looks it looks terrible, but it's certainly comforting, and so we've rearranged our entire living room to be a movie theater. I
Ooh.
cobbled together stereo equipment. It's just a hodgepodge of, this will work, and I've got a 7-1 stereo system hooked up to a projector that, was gifted to me, and so we have been making it through. I was doing a movie every single night regardless, 9 o'clock, shut off everything, go watch a movie,
Mm,
and I'd watch movies that I was like, "I'm never gonna watch this movie ever." I'll watch that movie. I watched Song to Song the other night, which is a bizarro film, but
mhm.
it was shot all at South by Southwest and in Austin, and really just a beautiful film that I think a handful of people have seen. But I'm now just doing that endlessly, and it has given me great comfort. And my daughter is taking a film theory class, and so
Oh, wow.
she's like, "Let's watch Chinatown." Oh yeah, let's watch Chinatown. That'd be great. And it's projected on a 12-foot, wall on our wall, and so it's just been rapturous to have the time
Mhm.
to just shut off the world and to watch art. And now again, we're in privy times where the Criterion Collection has its own channel and HBO Max and Disney Plus, and you have access to films that you know I couldn't find at my even most deep video rental place. I really really love it. That has been a true rapturous joy.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I think you're right. You mentioned it and it's so true. It's hard to find the time really to focus on that. Um,
1000%.
yeah, whether it's watching a movie, which is a little more passive, and reading, which I argue is incredibly active. I mean, it takes dedication to sit and read a book. Um, and that's one gift the pandemic's kind of given us, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, I should also say, of course, because I have you on, making art again. I've been
Yes,
making art again.
yes. Which is
Um,
fantastic. I didn't even know about your history with that.
yeah.
And I love the fact that, you started posting that and I commented on one of them. And then my wife, Amanda, saw that and then was kind enough to reach out to you. And now we have an original Osborn
Yeah.
piece in our living room, which I love.
It's been incredibly inspirational that she did that because it really spurred me. I have a wood shop here in the house, and I love being in there as that's my background. But I've been making furniture and
Right. Yeah.
stuff that has practical sense to it, and I had not been making much in the terms of what we'd call art. And I just, out of fatigue, was just like, I need to put some beautiful things in the world. And so I was like, I'm going to put these up. And it was really fun to do that because I got some great feedback, and including your wife. And as we speak, I have another piece boxed up and ready to be shipped out. And that's been really nice to have
Hmm.
that place too. I really have enjoyed that. It's nice to be able to share things without having to go into a gallery, set aside a night. I can just post it and go, I made this, you should make
Hmm.
stuff too. I do think that people need to have, creative uh, export into the world, being able
Right.
to share these things. And I love it when my friends pick up painting or drawing or whatever hobby they're into. And so, yeah, that's been really fun.
Oh, that's awesome. Oh man.
I have a
I'm
sp-
looking forward to more of
I have
that.
a piece that I have to share with you. It's spirited by the one that you own.
Oh, that's right. You
It,
mentioned that.
it's
Yeah, I'd like
sibling.
to see it. Yeah.
It's turned out beautiful. I'm really happy with it.
Cool. I can't wait. Awesome. Well, man, thank you again for taking the time. We got to do this
I
more
love it,
often.
Chris. It's been great. This has been great. Hey, man, just catching up with you. I love it. I selfishly really enjoy our conversation. So I'm really
Oh, I do too.
full of gratitude.
Yeah, thanks for allowing me to rally in this format. But yeah, we should just do it in general more often. We're
And if anybody has not heard any of Chris's previous podcasts, they're fantastical.
oh, thanks.
I've really enjoyed them. There were people that you've had on there that I'm just like, these are people I want to hear talk. This is
Oh,
great.
cool.
Really spirited and special. Good stuff, Chris.
Oh,
Thank you very much.
thanks. It's the closest thing I get to creativity at the moment, but it is a lot
It's a
of fun.
beautiful example. The art of conversation is no small feat. And
Mm,
I can't help but think of Eckhart Tolle's explanation of where happiness is.
mm.
And that idea that there is no happiness in the past, there is no happiness in the future, it is only in the present. And then this present is just remarkable. It's not lost on me being able to share this with you. I love it.
Oh, thank you so much.
Of course.
I want to thank Tom for taking the time to chat with us today and for sharing his various experiences with us. As always, if you're so inclined, please rate us, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter at Tough Love Pod. That's TOUGHLOVEPOD. And above all, share this podcast with your friends and fellow music industry and artist communities. It takes a village. You can reach us at chris@anhedoniamanagement.com. That's CHRIS at ANHEDONIAMGMT.com. Be well, trip up, get back up, and let's all learn as we go. Until next time.